Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this session with us today. I'm going to get started. We are recording. As and when you have questions, please enter them in the chat. But please note that we will be tackling most questions towards the end of our session because we do have a lot of content to get through and we're just trying to organize that better. So, Sundeep, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Ajit. Hi, everyone.
Awesome. So maybe I'll kick us off with a quick intro to myself, and then Sundeep, you can give your introduction. So my name is Ajit Ghuman. I am, more of an expert in the pricing side of things, less in the AI side of things. I have a book published in pricing called Price to Scale in 2021. I have led the pricing teams at companies like Twilio, and I run my own company called Monetizing. And we help SaaS companies improve their pricing strategies, pricing models, and we have some software tools to enable that as well, including a pricing calculator solution. I also run a Maven course called The Art of SaaS Pricing and Monetization, which towards the end of the course, I will provide you links to that as well. Really looking forward to discussing this topic with you today. Over to you, Sundeep.
Yeah, thanks, Ajit. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session. So I'm Sundeep. I'm a neuroscientist, AI scientist with around 16 years of experience in diverse settings. So I've spent around 10 years in academia at Oxford and UCL in the UK, couple of years at Amazon Alexa AI in the US, and the last 5 years I've been working closely with startups, both as an employee at companies like Swiggy, as well as my last role was that of head of AI at an early stage B2B SaaS startup. So I've seen companies at different scale in different domains, and I currently work as an AI consultant and coach based in Bangalore. So look forward to this session and interactions with you all. Over to you, Ajit.
Awesome. All right. So we have a really packed agenda today. I'm going to give you a quick overview and then get into it. So as far as the agenda is concerned, we are first going to cover topics in monetization. When it comes to pricing any software product, we have our own process that we go through, which I will show you, which is a 5-step framework for monetization, and I will cover some of the key elements of that framework in this session. That includes understanding value, that includes packaging and pricing metric decisions. After this conversation, we actually want to spend more time into one specific area, which is cost. The cost element of GenAI development is probably the most important piece that affects the monetization strategy itself. And we'll try to spend half the time in discussing costs and how different development options will take you down different roads and make your product viable or unviable. So with that, I'll continue. So we first want to discuss what is different now. What is different with this new class of GenAI products that was not the case earlier, and why is it required that we need to have a specialized webinar on this topic, perhaps even a specialized course? It is even in the publishing that different analyst firms are doing. One of the key criteria that they are saying that is most important in the development of AI is that demonstrating AI value is going to be critical within enterprises. However, while it is critical, it is also pretty unevenly distributed. When it comes to WYSIWYG software or traditional SaaS software, what you see is what you get. And there is less room for debate. Either it does automate a certain business process, for example, for you, or it does not. But when it comes to AI, some products are going to deliver outsized value, and we'll see some examples of that. And some products are not going to deliver any specific value. And the quality, there is a probabilistic and stochastic element to these products where they may not work. So the value will be uncertain. So therefore, there is more of a chance of blockbuster, just like movies have this blockbuster dynamic. AI products have more of this dynamic compared to regular SaaS products where it's just what you see, what you get. If it's a business process that you wanted to automate, you could have done that. When it is clear, the benefits are really big. Actually, yesterday, even, this should have been updated, but earlier in the year, Klarna came out with analysis of using AI in its own customer service operations. And within their operations, they were able to save $40 million in profit just with the use of AI-based agents. And their AI is deflecting around a quarter of all of the incoming inbound conversations, and it is doing the work of 700 full-time agents. So that is a huge lift for an AI product to make, and that is a large amount of value being added. Just yesterday, I think Andy Jassy, CEO of AWS, said that AI was saving 250 million I believe 250 million in costs for AWS. So when it works really well. And then there are, of course, cases where it doesn't work. So that's one thing. The other part to this is a cost element. There is a reason this is half our presentation today, that the cost of training these models is really high. Cost of training GPT-4 has been $100 million. Cost of training Llama 3.1 has been estimated to be $1 billion. If you want a custom model to be created with OpenAI, that is starting at $2 to $3 million. So this is not trivial amount of money. Bloomberg GPT, is an interesting story we'll cover towards the end of this presentation. But for them to train this model, it took $10 million. This is not regular SaaS software does not cost this much amount of money to make. So the development costs are non-trivial. There is a founder who's making AI-based avatars, and the amount of money he was spending based on this publication was $8,000 per day in GPU costs. So again, non-trivial and unlike regular SaaS applications. So the main difference between SaaS and AI first SaaS or AI only SaaS is that the profit equation is a little different. In regular SaaS, profit is revenue minus cost. Revenue is more deterministic. Costs are more deterministic. Cost will more deterministically go down over time as you amortize across a lot of customers. So your profit margin more or less keeps increasing, and pricing this sort of product becomes very easy because hardly if ever have you been keeping cost into account while doing a lot of pricing. You can do user-based pricing, you can do user-based pricing, regardless, you have very high profit margins. So almost this part of the equation is not that relevant traditional SaaS. But in AI first SaaS, two things change. One is, as I was discussing, you have a hit or a miss in terms of value proposition. So either your value is really compelling or it is not, in which case that affects the revenue component. And the costs are actually deterministically much, much higher. And for a product where the value is compelling, this could be an economically viable product. But a product where the value is not compelling, the costs are not going down. So that could be a severe disaster for an existing company, or you end up losing all of your VC money. So it's important to understand the dynamics of these products from both these lenses. So first we're going to cover sort of the upside, and we cover more of how do we look at monetization for any product, and we'll cover the cost element for AI products more later on. So the 5-step framework that we cover in the course that we teach in our Maven course, as well as in consulting, is as follows. For any software product, you first want to start with what is the problem we are solving, who are we solving this problem for, with pricing, what is our goal. So with an early stage product, more often the goal will be, hey, we want to capture market share. These are our market segments. Maybe there's mid-market, maybe there's enterprise. For example, it could be a B2B product, it could be a B2C product. The segmentation will be different, but you would note that down. And then you would traverse this chain and say, okay, for the chosen segments, what is our offer? What is the offering that is really fitting this segment? That becomes your packaging. Once you define packaging, you choose your key pricing metric or your key value metric that aligns you and the customer. So in the past, key value metrics have been just the number of licenses. Then it moved on to number of users. And then more recently, there are different type of usage metrics. AWS is just charging based on consumption. OpenAI is charging based on token. So you have to select a pricing metric that will work for both you and your customers. And then finally, you get to the price point decision, which is actually an easier decision if you've made good decisions with the packaging and pricing metric. And those become the most important decisions that you can make and require most debate. And if chosen incorrectly, those can actually have negative consequence in the sense that customers may not adopt the product, or even if they adopt, you may end up losing money if you haven't chosen them properly. Finally comes the point of operationalization. On this, we are not going to spend too much time today, but the point is valid that even the best strategy, if it cannot be operationalized, is not helpful. So the strategy that is going to be the best is the one that can be operationalized successfully at your company. All right, so what I want to spend is a little bit of time on packaging, a little bit of time on pricing metric decision, and then on price point, to give you a high level understanding of how these decisions are made. And then we'll go more into the cost component, which will affect both the pricing metric decision as well as the price point. Can everybody see my screen? There's somebody who cannot see my screen. Sundeep, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, awesome. All right, so in terms of packaging, there are a host of options that are available to you as you build out a product. And depending on the nature of your customer segmentation, one may be better than the other. So at the very left end of this slide, there are more one size fits all products. So think of Netflix. It's $12.99, maybe $15.99, whatever is the current price. You have a very large market, you have a singular price point, or maybe a couple of price points for a couple of different segments, and that's it. And you're trying to capture a large market with this price point and this offering. You would do that when you are really, because the market is really large, you are really not building a motion to capture customers individually or uniquely. You want to actually go after the whole world, for example. On the very other end, on the right side, is more a la carte pricing and packaging, where you are granularly selling different modules of the product. Maybe there is an underlying platform, maybe there is not, but you are the most granular as possible in selling the product. Now, what does that allow for? Very bespoke custom enterprise solutions, where you want to maximize monetization at the top end of the market. At the top end of the market, buyers are unique, their needs are unique. And by creating a custom solution, you lose out a little bit on sales efficiency, but you gain on the revenue potential for the customer. So you're more likely to do that when your market size is a little bit smaller and you want to capture the upside, because some of these markets exhibit whale dynamics, where 80 to 90% of customers don't pay a lot, but the 10% or 5% of your customers actually make your company. In which case, this sort of a la carte packaging is really the way to go for you to maximize your revenue. And then a lot of companies lie in the middle. This is why many companies will start with something like a good, better, best packaging, which is the one in the middle. And they'll say, well, roughly we have a few market segments, let's say SMB, mid-market enterprise, and corresponding to that, we're going to have good, better, best packaging with graded feature sets, and that will allow us to monetize most of that market across these different segments. Now, so roughly this is the range, and you can choose, you can understand your market, understand the segment, and sort of choose a packaging strategy that will work well for you given these constraints. What I will note is that there is a tendency for SaaS founders today to say, I'm going to start with good, better, best, no matter what. And that's not a great strategy, because that starts with a misunderstanding of your customer segment or your lack of understanding of customer segmentation. And then you will led to believe that all packages should just be good, better, best, which is absolutely not the case. Because if you have this sort of packaging and in a different type of market, you may be actually leaving money on the table and doing yourself a gross injustice, depending on the nature of your market. So you really have to be careful and cognizant of what your market segmentation looks like before you choose packaging. Packaging is a secondary step in our process, not the primary step. The primary step is still understanding market segmentation. So that is a point I wanted to make first. Many times, when it comes to a GenAI product, those will not be a net new product to begin with. Those will be add-ons into an existing product packaging lineup. In which case, here we offer a framework that my partner Jan Pasternak has created around how should you think about this. If this feature is really going to be very popular that you're creating and has a very high willingness to pay with customers, then you can add to sort of a premium package in the lineup that will incent customers to upgrade to that premium package. So that is definitely one option. Another very more common option is to make that available as an add-on. So you know that there is some willingness to pay, but maybe you don't know what is the popularity in your existing customer base for this AI product. In which case you will offer that as an add-on, maybe across all packages or some packages that will allow you to maximize revenue potential of that product. Now, if the willingness to pay is not that high and it is more of a table stakes feature where popularity is high, but there's not that much willingness to pay, you may see some type of AI features like maybe AI summarization or other table stakes AI capabilities just being by default added to all packages in a lineup. So you have to make a call. What do I want? Do I want adoption? Do I want to maximize revenue? And note that the more add-ons you keep adding on to your existing plans, the more you reduce sales efficiency. So there is a little bit of a balancing act that you have to run here. And here, as I present this, I will show you what Zendesk has done for one of their products. But this is roughly a rubric by which you can figure out how you will add a new AI offering into an existing lineup. The last slide was more about how you start a new company, but this is more about what do you do when AI is a new feature and capability to an existing product. So that was the first decision around packaging. So we are assuming that we have understood our goals. We know what our segmentation is. Based on the goals and segments, we have defined packaging. And now we're going to look at the key pricing metric, which is a very important decision when it comes to GenAI products. So again, I want to provide you options of what are your options. On the left side of the screen, you have more fixed and predictable pricing metric options, where maybe you have on-prem licenses. Then as you go forward towards the right, maybe you have named user licenses or concurrent user licenses that have still a very high degree of predictability and is very popular in traditional SaaS models. As you go more towards the variable pricing metric, you see companies like Amazon charging for, Amazon EC2, Amazon S3, all of the consumption-based products. Cloud OpenAI is working based on tokens. So all of these are more consumption-based pricing options. And there is no certain answer for any product when it's launching, what you should choose. It's a decision that you have to make, but this is the spectrum that is available to you, where you have to sort of figure out where you want to be. And now we're going to cover what are the attributes and elements that you should be considering when you make this decision. So the top three, so here I am offering 7 key considerations for pricing metric selection. The top 3 are more about what your customers care about. The second batch of 3, 4, 5, 6 are more about what matters to you. And the last one is about, can you actually even implement it? So the first 3 are around, let's say you're a young company. Customers could think of you as a risky product, in which case many even non-AI SaaS companies are going to be offering their product in more of a usage-based pay-as-you-go model, where the risk is reduced for the end customer. They can try the product. If they are using it, they can pay for it. And if there isn't risk perception, then you can choose more of a user-based pricing model, because there is more of a upfront commitment that you make with those models. So that's the first criteria. The second is mental anchors. In a blue ocean environment, you have a lot of flexibility of how you choose the pricing metric. But in a competitive environment, let's say you're coming out with, let's say, a Salesforce add-on or even a Zendesk add-on. In these markets, user-based pricing has a very long history, and everybody's going to compare you to, well, here is how Salesforce does the pricing. So you have to be careful about, well, is there a market leader, market maker in your segment? If market maker is doing something, you will likely face a lot of resistance, because customers will be comparing you to the market maker. And very important here, is there an alignment with value? Does the client's winning and their bill, the amounts that they're being charged, will that go hand in hand? You could have, in the book that I've written, I've explained Nick's panel story, where they've been charging by events, and at some point they moved to monthly active users on the website, or monthly tracked users on the website. And the reason they did it is many times the events on a website was not correlated with the ROI that they were getting as a business, or the events had no correlation with the business's success. So you really need to pick a metric that is aligned to your customer success and is not internal navel gazing to just how much, let's say, CPU consumption that was being used, or storage consumption, or whatever metric of consumption that you think was consumption, because it really needs to work for the customer. So those are the first three attributes. The second three attributes are about it needs to work for the customer and for you. So the first part is consumption. Now, if you are an existing business, let's say you have user-based pricing or some other model for a long time, and let's say you had a CRM product, right? And CRM products are used mostly as capabilities. I have a CRM. I may use it for a few days a month. I may not, but I need to have a CRM. I know that. If the CRM vendor changed the pricing from user to usage, they may find an immediate drop in the usage, because there was no usage. They'll find an immediate drop in revenue. So usage-based pricing in that sense actually made very little sense, because they would have lost a lot of their revenue on usage-based pricing, because the client has a particular way in which they view your product and a particular way in which they use your product. They are not using you as they use AWS. They are using you that, hey, I have a car that sits in the garage. When I need to go do something, I can drive it. But other times it sits in the garage and I value it even if it sits in the garage. So you have to think about what type product you have. Very important, and something that's going to take half our time today, is cost patterns. What is the impact on your cost of goods sold as consumption scales? Traditional SaaS applications, this is hardly a concern, because as consumption scales, you get even better margin. But today we'll see that that's not the case with many GenAI products. Finally, competitive action. If your competitors are choosing a certain option and the market is moving to one direction, then you have to be cognizant of that, even though other things may or may not pan out. So these are all the factors that you have to keep into account and then make a decision for what is the right metric. Finally, implementability. With most usage-based options, especially with existing companies, there's going to be a lot of work that requires to be done to get this to work. You have to instrument your product data set. Whatever meters that you want to create, those have to be instrumented. You have to create feature flags. You have to make sure your CPQ and billing systems are updated. Some of this work can take years, and has taken years in some of my older employers. If you want to move fast, some answers are better than others. So the best strategy is not always the most practical strategy. And so implementation is more important. Now, in younger companies, implementation is easier because there is no history of things that you have to change. So you can just build something from scratch. But over time, things get stale, and then moving becomes hard. Specifically for AI pricing, there are new dynamics. So I really like this article by Jamin Ball about is seed-based pricing dead, which is something he wrote in June. And the key points that come out in this article, which is very obvious, is if you're creating a disruption in the market, very likely it's going to reduce the number of seats. That's going to happen, for example, in customer service software, where it has been historically priced by the number of seats. What are you going to do when the number of agents themselves are going to reduce, and your product is going to cause the reduction or maybe even layoffs? How will you price then? And this is a tricky situation for these vendors. Then what metric will work when you have margin pressure? So some pricing metric may work better than others. User-based pricing, again, may not work, because one user may use your products 10 times and one user may only use your product 1x time. And you may have a break even of, let's say, 1.2 per user, and you're getting your margin there. So if somebody is using the product 10 times, that's causing a really adverse effect on your bottom line. And so just sometimes if the cost is too high, you may not have an option to do user-based pricing. You will have to do some sort of consumption-based pricing, because the underlying economics need to work and the costs are very high. And that tends to happen a lot with AI products. And finally, he mentioned that he expects that hybrid metrics will be more often a thing, that there will be a platform component, a non-AI user-based platform component, and an AI-based component, which I agree with. I think in the future, we will see both of these options being presented to customers. So a couple of examples for companies that are creating generative content. So there are a few of these companies in video AI. There's a company called Artbreeder, Botica. All of these folks are selling credits, bundles of consumption credits per user per time period, right? So this isn't really user-based pricing. This is really usage-based pricing sold in bundles. So most generative content companies are selling their plans like this. That is preventing a lot of revenue variability for them, and while offering the consumption based bundles to the customer so that they can choose what is working well for them. This seems to be where this sort of product is going to coalesce in terms of pricing. In terms of existing enterprise SaaS companies, things become more interesting. So this is an example of Zendesk that they've been offering AI agents as AI powered bots and offering some automated resolutions per agent per month in their existing plan, beyond which it can charge up to $2 per automated resolution per month, or it can, if you buy a bundle, it can go as low as $1. Now note that they are creating this metric called automated resolution per agent per month. That is quite a contrived metric, and the definition for that and what customers perceive that definition to be is not going to be very easy. Many customers are going to have their own definition. Zendesk is going to have their own definition. This is going to take some time for them to really land. So, but this is a metric that they have chosen for their AI agents. At the same time, they have other advanced AI capabilities that they're just charging on a per agent basis, and that what you could just add on. So one can hypothesize that this is being done mostly because this is costly and resolutions are unpredictable. But advanced AI features may have some cost associated with it, but may not have the same cost dynamics like the other products. At the same time, like the rubric I showed you earlier, not all of their customers are going to be interested in these advanced AI features. But it seems like Zendesk really wants to create adoption for their AI agents and bets that this is both a mechanism for them to make money and ramp up on adoption. So this is an example of what an enterprise SaaS company is doing. But I expect there to be a lot of movement and changes and experimentation here before these companies really land where they want to be. And the similar dynamics I'm seeing across Salesforce Einstein and Salesforce AI features as well. So how would you think about the Zendesk case, right? So if it were me, I would write down all of the key considerations in different columns, and I would make a candidate list of different pricing metrics, and then I would see what matches most. So the per resolution definitely I think will be considered valuable. There are no existing anchors around that, so that is questionable. Is it aligned to the customers winning? Yes. Is there going to be enough usage so that you will make money? Yes. Is it proportionate to cost? Not really sure, because the resolution could be just a couple of answers and replies, or it could be 20 answers and replies. So depending on how you define resolution, it could be very costly or not costly. Is competition doing it? Not sure. This is very early in the market. Is it implementable? Actually, this is harder to implement because resolution is harder to define. So that's why I had a question mark. So you would do the same thing for other options. I think they had started with MAU, monthly active users, where some of these things are better than others. Like MAU is more implementable because it is more obvious what it is. But there's perhaps some reason that they have moved away from that. Perhaps the customers were not thinking in that fashion. In any case, whenever you have options, you want to lay down those options and compare them against each other to find the best options. What you should not do is say, this is our metric and not consider other options. You should definitely make a list and see which option will be the best. All right. Then the last point in the step ladder I showed you is the price point selection. Now, we're not going to go too deep into this because this is not really, the methodology doesn't change for AI products or regular products. You look at the competition, you look at your market, you understand the usage data and cost of goods sold, and then you do some amount of testing. You create a hypothesis and you test that. Can do qualitative in-person testing as well as quantitative testing via Van Westendorf surveys, max diff surveys, or conjoint analysis. The book I've written, the QR code is here on the right side. So this is a free download. You can go up, enter your email address, and you can read more about this method or a lot of other topics on this front. So by this point, we have covered a lot of the step function of pricing. We discussed key elements of packaging, key elements of pricing metric selection, and we've touched on price point determination. Now we will go deeper into the cost element, which will influence both the pricing metric decision and the price point decision. And for that, I will hand it over to Sundeep.
Great. Thank you, Ajit. So yeah, as Ajit mentioned in this section, I will focus on the costs of generative AI development. So as well as the strategies around developing models, whether based on closed source models or open source models. And towards the end, I'll also walk you through a case study for a real world generative AI use case where you can learn to compute the costs and see how it scales and decide for yourself which of the different strategies work for you, right? So starting with cost, there are several factors that influence and contribute to the total cost of GenAI development. So performance of the models themselves, right? In terms of accuracy, latency, throughput, and even evaluation of generative AI models can contribute significant costs because these models are known to hallucinate. And it is important in several domains to make sure that we are giving precise answers to the customers. The cost of data in terms of preparing data sets for training these large models, processing data, as well as transfer and storage is also significant. A lot of companies, especially the big tech companies, which are in the business of building foundational models, are also striking data partnerships. For instance, Google has struck a $60 million annual partnership with Reddit to use their data for training their LLMs. Right? Infrastructure is also a key cost factor, especially if you're hosting your own models. So there are different aspects of cost related to the cloud provider that you're using in terms of GPUs, in terms of GPUs for training models, for hosting models, as well as other related costs related to data storage and management. Once you have developed an AI model for your particular use case, integrating that model into your existing architecture or your client-side systems is also a significant cost factor. Right? And all these four different factors that I mentioned will continue to scale up in terms of the hardware requirements as the usage increases. Then there are secondary costs, which are true for most SaaS applications, whether based on AI or not, including licensing, security, compliance. One key factor which is different for Gen AI versus traditional AI is the human resource aspect. So if you are considering building your own generative AI system, then you need to hire specialized AI ML talent, which we know is quite rare out there in the market and cost a lot. So for reference, OpenAI's engineers are drawing a salary of up to $900,000 to $1 million. And you can expect, for yourself, starting salaries for these Gen AI engineers could be upwards of $200,000 to $250,000, right? Next slide, Ajit. Right. So in terms of when we think about implementing generative AI models and infusing them into your products, there are three different strategies that you can go with, right? So the first one is to use closed source models, and you can use them in two ways. You can use APIs directly. So here I'm referring to models such as GPT-4 and GPT-4o from OpenAI, the Claude series of models from Anthropic, and the Gemini Pro series of models from Google. You can also customize some of these closed source APIs. So far, most of these same providers have made some of the smaller versions of their best performing models available for fine tuning and customization. But just like a week ago, OpenAI announced that they are also making GPT-4 available for customization. The second way to go about building generative AI models is using open source models, which you can use as is, or again, you can customize by fine tuning on top of these models. with your own data from your specific domain and company, right? So Llama 3.1 from Meta, Mixtral from the French startup Mistral, and interestingly, Google is also paving way with open source as well, in addition to the closed source models with the Gemma series of models. So these models are available where you can fine tune them. You sometimes even have access to the data, the entire training framework, and it's much easier for a lot of companies to just build on top of these models and leverage the knowledge that these models already capture. Third way, and probably the hardest way, is for you to train your own model from scratch, where you can use either closed source model or an open source model, depending on your choice, right? However, the choice of these different strategies is associated with different sets of pros and cons. Next slide. Right? So if you're thinking of going with closed source model, you have the benefit of effortless integration using APIs. You don't have to worry about sourcing and managing infrastructure and cloud costs, etc. And this is a strategy that gives you the fastest time to market so that you can build adoption and evaluate feedback from customers before developing further. However, the cons of using closed source models is that most of the times they might be lacking in domain knowledge. So let's say you're a company in healthcare and you have private proprietary data. Some of these general purpose foundational models may not have seen that data and may not be as performant for your use case compared to models that you might develop yourself, right? You can also face speed and rate limits, which can affect the user experience. And you also face the risk of vendor lock-in with closed source models. Coming to open source strategies, you have the benefit of freedom to use any model and cloud provider of your choice. You have complete control over the choice of model and the data that you use to customize these models further. And you can, again, exercise full control over your infrastructure, your choice of GPU providers, and so on. However, open source models are also not straightforward to build. Customizing them is not commoditized yet, and it still takes a significant time and effort to develop performant, customized, or fine-tuned open source models. Right? Coming to the last strategy of training your own model, this is the one which is associated with maximum freedom and control in terms of data that you can use to even pre-train the model. Right? You have higher data privacy security standards, and you can really build a competitive edge versus other rivals in your domain who might be using closed source APIs, right? However, the cons are that you require specialized talent and it takes significant amount of time, let's say from 6 months to even a year, to implement and hit the market. Next slide. So in the next set of slides, I will focus on three aspects: performance, speed, as well as cost for both open source and closed source models. Now, if we rewind 2 years ago to April 22, there were only closed source models, and OpenAI was the leading player in the market. So they were providing the most competitive models. But if we now look at today's scenario, moving forward to August 2024, we see that open source models have significantly caught up with OpenAI and other closed source APIs, where the difference or the delta in performance is now almost negligible, right? So the performance gap of around 20-25% that you see 2 years ago has been reduced to almost nothing 2 years later, right? So the models in red are your closed source models like your GPT-4, Gemini from Google, and Claude from Anthropic. And your best leading open source models here are your Llama, Mixtral, and other such models. Next slide. This is another representation and analysis of the performance of open source versus closed source models. And I have highlighted the top 4 models in terms of performance. And you can see that Llama 3.1 is as good as GPT-4o on the certain set of tasks that these models were evaluated for, right? So the gap is almost non-existent today. Next slide. However, if you were considering evaluating a number of models, right? Because there's a lot of choice in the market. You need to look at models that not only give you good performance, but at significant cost advantage. So in this chart where I have quality or performance on the y-axis and cost or price on the x-axis, you need to be in the top left quadrant highlighted in green, where you get maximum bang for your buck. And as of today, the leading models in terms of cost advantages are your Llama 3.1, which is an open source model, and GPT-4 and Gemini, which are closed source models. Next slide. The other trend that has played up over the last few months is that since the availability of the Llama series of models, starting with Llama 3, Mistral, and Llama 3.1, which was launched a few weeks ago, is that we can fine-tune them with your existing data and evaluate them on several different tasks. And what this particular startup Predibase has found is that open source models, when fine-tuned with your own data, significantly outperform GPT-4 as the standard benchmark representing a closed source API. So here the performance of GPT-4, which is shown in all black or dark blue, is at 66% averaged across 31 tasks. And you can see the benefit that you gain from fine tuning for the models that are represented above GPT. So if you look at Llama 3 8B in the first row, you see that its base performance is probably around 40%. But if you fine tune, you almost double its performance to 75%. So this is another trend that is playing out and something to be cognizant of when you're making your choice between open source and closed source models. Next slide, Ajit. So the second factor that is important is speed, by which I mean the number of output tokens that are generated per second. Now, this is an important parameter as well, because for a lot of use cases, your users and customers might expect almost real-time output and performance, right? So whether it is generating text or images or video, the faster that these models generate output with minimum latency, the better it impacts the user experience. So here again, if you look at the top two models, so you have Gemini 1.5, which is a closed source model from Google, but we again see that Llama 3.1 from Meta is almost as fast as the top closed source model, right? And we can again do this analysis of quality versus speed this time. And you would like to be in the top right quadrant, again highlighted in green, where you have the best performance at the highest output speed or tokens per second. And here also we see both closed source models and open source models being equivalent in performance, in speed. Thank you. Next slide. The third factor, which is again very, very important, is cost. Now, if we take the example of OpenAI, which, as we all know, was the market leader and first to market, and we look at the cost of per token of its set of GPT models. So if we were to plot the cost of tokens per million tokens in terms of dollars over time, we see that the cost of tokens has reduced by almost 240 times over the last 2 years. Now, 240x reduction in cost is non-trivial, right? And going forward, we might expect significant cost reductions as well, so that this technology of generative AI becomes so commoditized that no one will think twice before implementing or adopting it for their own use cases. Right? So this is another important trend playing out, where the cost of tokens is reducing by 2 orders of magnitude within a couple of years. Right? So this is another chart showing the same picture, where both the cost of input tokens and output tokens is reduced significantly over the last 2 years, and we're down to prices as low as 15 cents for 1 million tokens on input and output as well. Next slide. So this is another important slide to think about, and these are numbers for a real world use case. The use case here is of text generation, and you are requesting, there are 8 requests per second from your users, and the cost of using a GPT-4 model, which is a closed source API, for 1 year at this required throughput is almost $31,969,000. Now, what this particular startup Predibase is showing, which is a vendor that performs or provides fine-tuning as a service, is that if they fine-tune a model, in particular here, Llama three 8 billion parameters model using 6A100 GPUs, they achieve similar performance, but at a cost of only $252,000. That amounts to a delta of $31 million and $700,000, right? Of course, this particular use case is dependent on the use case. This is text generation. We are looking at real-time inference where the application is always on. But these are real numbers and real cost savings that you can potentially achieve with custom open source models versus closed source models. Next slide. So in the next section, I will focus on a real world case study focusing on generative AI use case in customer service. So Ajit alluded earlier to Zendesk and the way it's pricing its AI agents. So they have introduced an advanced AI feature priced at $50 per agent per month, where the agent can use this, where the real human customer service agent can use Zendesk agent for various use cases, right? To expand on the customer request, to make the tone more formal or more friendly, or even to summarize customer service calls. Now, one thing to mention here is that companies like Zendesk, Intercom, Freshworks, Klarna even, which Ajit mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, they all started building their generative AI tools based on GPT-4. So GPT-4 launched in March 23, and they went quickly to market to their customers because at that time, GPT-4 was the state of the art and no other open source model was anywhere close, as we saw in the charts earlier, right? But I will walk you through the analysis of cost for closed source models as well as open source models for this use case as it scales over time and over usage. And you can see the numbers that we get, right? Next slide. So this is the context. This is the business context. So imagine you are a company like Zendesk providing customer service, generative AI tools. Your client, let's assume, is a B2C company that is employing 100 customer service agents, right? And each agent answers 100 calls of average duration 5 minutes per day, which amounts to almost 3.65 million calls per year, right? And the use case that we're focusing on is to produce written text summaries of all the audio customer calls, right? So we can now compute the input tokens and the number of output tokens by using this analysis. So assuming a word rate of 150 words per minute in speech, we compute the number of words per 5-minute call, the number of tokens per word, and we come to a number of thousands on the input side per call. Similarly, if you're looking at one-page summary of every customer service call, which roughly amounts to 500 words, we are looking at 666 tokens on the output side. Next slide. So if I were to now compute the cost of inference by combining the cost of the input tokens and the output tokens based on the numbers that we saw earlier for different open source and closed source models, we come to, and if you look at the second last column of cost per year, we come to a value of around $1,155 for Llama 3.1's smaller model. And if you were to use GPT-4o, which is a closed source model, we're looking at a cost of almost $55,000, right? So let's see how this cost scales for open source and closed source models with increasing usage. Next slide. Now here on the left-hand side in the first column, I have detailed different factors which relate to model training, fine-tuning, hosting, inference, data, compute, and infra. So when you're using just a closed source API like GPT-4o, let's assume that the only cost that you are incurring is related to inference. So here our annual cost for one client or one customer is $55,000. Now I've plugged in different numbers for in the second and third columns where you're either customizing an open source model or training your own model. So for open source model, you have fine-tuning costs, you have model hosting costs, model inference costs, data, as well as compute and infra. Similar analysis has been done in the third column for the strategy of training your own model. So if I were to look at the maximum cost of customizing an open source model, given our assumptions, we are looking at a number around $366,000 per year for customizing open source models. And if we were to train our own model, the maximum cost I'm looking at is around 636,000 US dollars, right? Now let's see how this cost scales as we go in terms of increasing clients and over orders of magnitude. Now, as we go from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 clients, for each of the three different strategies, in the first table in the top half, I have shown how the cost increases. So when we're using an API like GPT-4o, we are simply multiplying the cost per customer by the number of clients that we are getting, right? So $55,000 scales with the number of clients. When we are looking at open source models as well as own models from scratch, we have significant upfront costs in terms of model development and infrastructure. And we are also adding the cost of adding more clients as it scales. Now, I have also mentioned a factor here, beta, which is typically less than 1. It's difficult to estimate it. But even if we assume the highest value for beta, which is equal to 1, and we assume that the cost also scales linearly, we now see the numbers in the bottom half of the table, where the cost for 10 clients with API is $550,000. For open source custom models, it's $377,000, or 68% of the cost of using an API. And training your own model costs us $647,000, which is 20% higher than the cost of using an API. Now, if we look at the next three rows, as we go to 100,000 and 10,000 clients, we see that the cost of using open source model is just a fraction. It's 8% at 100 clients, 2.8% at 1,000 clients, and only 2.2% of the API cost at 10,000 clients. Similarly, if you were to train your own model, and as you go from 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 clients, the cost is just 13.7%, 3%, and 2.3% at maximum scale, right? The other interesting thing to note is that at maximum scale is shown here at 10,000 clients. The cost of using both open source custom models and training your own models is similar, and still a fraction of the cost of using a GPT-4o like API, right? So this is what is one of our take-home messages for you, that if you are to look at closed source models, our costs scale linearly, but it scales non-linearly with open source models as usage. And at maximum scale, beyond a certain cutoff, you will find that open source solutions will cost you significantly lesser than continuing with APIs. Next slide. Another conclusion to say here is to be mindful of the fact that, as Ajit mentioned earlier about Bloomberg GPT, they spent over $10 million over 6 to 9 months building their own GPT, only to find that a few months later, when GPT-4 was launched, it outperformed Bloomberg's GPT on all tasks related to finance, right? So the time and effort and investment made by GPT and the moat that they thought that they would develop was lost when the next more sophisticated foundational model came around, right? You also have other anecdotes, like in the other picture here, about a startup called Latitude, which was embedded in the OpenAI GPT ecosystem, but was incurring significant costs of $200,000 per month with OpenAI bills and AWS bills. But after it reassessed its costs and decided to switch to another generative AI provider, it significantly reduced its operating costs to $1,000 and also accordingly adjusted its monetization strategy. So the key here is to be mindful of costs, but also stay nimble and adaptive, because we are in a very changing landscape where the cost is coming down, open source is catching up and even surpassing closed source models. And who knows how this will play out in the next few months and years to come. So to conclude, I'll let Ajit talk about pricing and monetization.
Yeah. So as you could see that the costs play such an important role in your pricing strategy. Now, depending on how your costs scale, you're going to have uncertainty in the pricing model, and you're seeing that in the bigger players, they have this uncertainty. with Zendesk, you'll see a lot of back and forth, a lot of changes, clients being confused. That is going to be the case. These decisions, specifically the packaging and pricing metric decisions, are going to be pivotal, right? I think packaging is still a little bit easy if you follow some logical process. But for a new product, especially for on the enterprise side, where you have both a main platform as well as an add-on AI component, there choosing the right metric is going to be very important. For general, just basic generative AI products which have nothing, no other component to that, I think pricing could still be simple. It's just a matter of making it economical. But that's the reason why the costs are so high, is why you're seeing it can't be just a simple user-based pricing. The consumption is bundled into that user-based pricing at all times. Over to you, Sandeep.
Yeah, so if I were to summarize my presentation focused on AI costs and give you a few take-home messages, if you are looking to, quickly go to market, I would suggest go with closed source APIs like GPT. But if you have a long-term vision around investment in Gen AI and you want more control over your models and build a competitive edge, you can leverage open source models like Llama 3.1. Now, I think we are at a time where the launch of Llama 3.1 is a pivotal moment where companies which might have been locked in the GPT-4 or OpenAI ecosystem might be reassessing their costs. And we might see a switch towards open source going forward. So it's important to be mindful of where you are and how the landscape is changing around you. Right. So what we are seeing is that the performance of open source models is nearly the same as closed source APIs. And if you were to fine tune these open source models with your own proprietary data, you can even achieve better performance versus the leading closed source APIs like GPT-4, right? And as with GenAI, as with similar technologies that have come in the past, these models and these technologies will continue to become cheaper, better, smaller, faster, and easier to develop over time and be more accessible to more users, right? So with that, we end our presentation and look forward to your questions. You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or share it in the chat window as well.
Doesn't seem like there are more questions at this point, Sandeep. I think, oh, we have a hand raised. Yeah, go ahead, Hani.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much of my video here. I appreciate the very insightful conversation here. I just wanted to understand on the token cost. On one of the slides, you talked about 3 cost of token reduced by 240x. How are these measured in terms of using the API versus people just like typing into like a ChatGPT prompt, right? How do you measure the same? Is the same base calculation, or is the API access priced differently than the user interface?
Right. So ChatGPT is a chat interface to your models like GPT-4. Whereas if you were to subscribe to GPT-4 separately, you get your OpenAI key and you can hit the API and you can basically codify your use case, right? So this is my prompt. This is the kind of output I'm looking at, right? So ChatGPT and such other models are more on the conversational side. They provide a good UI and are easily accessible to the masses. But if you're, serious developer or founder looking to build GenAI products, then, if you're considering OpenAI, you will be using their API. Right? But the fundamental cost is still for the closed models in terms of number of tokens. The way different providers calculate tokens is different. So some companies say it's 4 characters. Some companies say the typical accepted number is 1 token is 3/4 of a word, right? So that's the general sort of formula we're looking at when we're looking at defining tokens. And then per token, you have costs both on the input side. So this is the input, this is my question or prompt, and then the output that the model generates. Again, you can count the number of tokens and compute your overall cost, like I showed in the slides earlier as well.
Okay, so I guess when you talk about the open versus closed source from a investment perspective, you're basically the way that if you're developing a UI or some type of front end. So I don't know if you're familiar with this company, UIZARD. It's like a generative AI, like UX wireframe company that was bought by Miro recently. But they did a really neat, innovation where you could basically prompt, hey, design me a mobile web app or a mobile app that allows me to do shopping and combine the best aspects of like Airbnb and Uber into
Right.
this design flow. And it would basically generate the screens based on that prompt. Now, I'm not sure what they were using on the back end. It might have been OpenAI or Cloud or whatever, but they basically took those prompts and generated screens based on prompts. Instead of using Figma to do it from scratch, you could generate. So I was just trying to think about like, how would they have, costed that thing? Because it was like a freemium version, right? So you could use it, experiment it with it, but how would they have actually taken that use case and costed it out to say this would cost like $10 for each user that generates, 20 screens? Those economics, how do you guide people to think about costing something like that out?
Yeah, so that's a complex use case where we're talking about multimodal applications, right? Involving images, even video,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, and the cost of generating images is different from the cost of generating text. So potentially you can do similar analysis. Okay, this is my cost of generating text. This is my cost of generating images. Let's say using a model like DALL-E from OpenAI.
Yes.
And then where, what's the threshold, right? But one thing to mention here, as you recalled, is that user interface is very important. So it is one of the reasons why Perplexity is doing so well in the search space versus Google, even though they might be using similar foundational technology in terms of GenAI, right? So good product and design is key to customer adoption and scale. So move on to the next question. There are a few in the slides, Ajit.
I was just answering Alan's question around when you would see usage and user-based pricing, when you may see just usage-based. And so I was just explaining that let's take a young company and an existing company, right? Existing companies are more likely to already have a user-based pricing, especially in an enterprise space. There, you are likely to retain that as a core platform pricing, at least for now, until there is a huge disruption. If there is no huge disruption, they're going to retain the user-based pricing and likely make a decision around how the additional AI components will be priced. So that could be a seat-based pricing like we saw with Zendesk. Zendesk is doing both a user-based pricing and a usage-based pricing for different parts of their AI capability, right? So you may see more of that hybrid approach with enterprise SaaS. With newer companies, with more of just a pure AI offering, you may see these companies starting to offer just a usage-based component, or they may sell bundled usage, as I had shown you. And as they grow and they become more of a platform or a system of record, then they may also have a usage-based, user-based component, right? So if the dynamic is such, I call it like the CRM or I buy a car dynamic, but not use it much. There, a user-based model works well. But if I'm, the taxi dynamic is I'm using it every day. So it is possible that younger AI companies, let's say like Typeface, eventually will have both models because they're both offering a platform for collaboration, storage, a central repository, and an AI capability. But a simple product like Midjourney, they may sell bundles of usage, but there may not be any platform capability associated with their products. Therefore, just a usage, in the regular understanding of the word, the regular user-based pricing may not work well for them. They're likely going to sell bundles of usage. And then they could call it user-based, but it's basically what it is. It's bundles of usage. All right, I think we're over time. So I thank everybody for your participation. We have an ongoing course on the art of SaaS pricing and monetization, which is shown on the right side on the screen here. Our next cohort is actually later this week, and then they have a cohort later on October 22nd. So we are providing a discount code that you will get right after this call is finished. We are also going to create a course just on monetizing AI, because we have only touched the surface in this presentation. And if you are interested, we'll send you a discount code. If you can take this form, submit what you're interested to see in this course, because we're going to be developing content for it now. And we would love to meet you again when we flesh out that whole course. But appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank
Awesome.
you.